Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to welcome you to Bonn on behalf of the German Federal Minister for Economic Cooperation and Development, Dr. Gerd Müller. The future of humankind will be decided first and foremost in rural areas. More than 70% of all people in the world who are suffering from poverty and hunger live in rural areas. Poverty and hunger have a rural face. Unemployment has a rural face. Environmental degradation is essentially rural. And it is the rural world with its natural resources that is threatened most by climate change. If poverty and hunger, high rates of youth unemployment, protracted crisis, environmental degradation and climate change come together, terrorism and conflicts and forced migration can take root easily. In Africa, our neighboring continent, 1 in 2 young people is giving thought to leaving his or her rural home. Rural areas simply do not provide enough options to meet the aspirations of young generation in particular. And the more the exploitation and degradation of the natural assets of the rural world advance, the harder it becomes to provide decent livelihoods. Entire landscapes are at risk of devastation. More poverty, more hunger, despair and rootlessness would be the result. This is obviously not acceptable. That is why the rural world clearly deserves greater political attention. The concept note of the Global Landscape Forum says, sustainable landscapes are essential for the future we want, for food, livelihoods, health, renewable materials, energy, biodiversity, business development, trade, climate regulation, and water. I could not agree more. Landscapes for people and for the planet, that is what we must achieve. We need to make sure that rural areas are not left behind, that people and the environment in the countryside will not become the losers of globalization. Young people in particular have the potential to become leaders of change for an inclusive rural transformation. But they need support and a conducive environment to use the potential. In April this year, the BMZ hosted the G20 conference, One World, No Hunger, the Future of the Rural World in Berlin. In preparation for this conference, we reached out to 10,000 young people in Africa through a text message survey and asked about their views on how they want to live. More than half of them said they would consider leaving their rural areas if conditions did not improve. But at the same time, more than 90% saw a brighter future if the general conditions in rural areas changed. So what needs to change? What would be a conducive environment for making rural landscapes attractive places to live? I would like to encourage you to take a look at the Berlin Charter adopted at this G20 conference. There you will find some answers to these questions from young people and other stakeholders. We now have 2 days to discuss this. Let me just share some ideas and questions that merit more in-depth discussion. How can we ensure that the necessary increase in agricultural production will be sustainable? How can we balance competing interests between the protection and the sustainable use of natural resources in landscapes? How can we balance the need for forest protection with the need to produce more food? What are the main drivers of deforestation? How can we address them? How can we incorporate multi-sectoral approaches in existing policies and implement them in development programs? What role do we see for land use planning, and how do we ensure the participation of rural communities? These are just some of the many questions that BMZ is faced with as we implement our development programs. The BMZ launched the One World No Hunger initiative 4 years ago. We have been investing about 1.5 billion euros per year in agriculture, food security, and rural development. That is about 20% of the entire BMZ annual budget. Germany has become one of the leading donors in this field. Under the AFR 100, the African Forest Landscape Restoration Initiative, we are working with the World Resources Institute, NEPAD, and more than 20 African partner countries. This initiative is a country-led effort to rehabilitate 100 million hectares of deforested and degraded landscapes across Africa by 2030. This is our strong contribution to the New York Declaration on Forests and the Bonn Challenge. Our engagement in forestry has increased significantly. Our current investment portfolio comprises about 2 billion euros in more than 200 ongoing projects. The new BMZ Forest Action Plan addresses the conservation and sustainable use of forests, as well as the restoration of forest landscapes and the promotion of deforestation-free supply chains. We are doing this in close cooperation with our partner countries and with national and international partner agencies from civil society, the private sector, and academia. And finally, I'm very glad to announce that we agreed to provide, together with the Federal Ministry for the Environment, funding amounting to 11 million euros for the Global Landscapes Forum. There is hardly any field where people and the environment, human development, and natural resource management are as closely interlinked as in landscape management. Man and biosphere cannot be separated. That is what sustainability is all about. This challenging task requires a broad and high-level dialogue based on evidence. The Global Landscapes Forum plays a decisive role in facilitating such dialogue. Germany is very grateful to CIFER and other partners for providing this platform for exchange. This, ladies and gentlemen, is exactly what we need in order to achieve sustainable landscapes. Thank you very much for your attention.